Welcome to More Able Than Dis, the podcast where we discuss everything related to disability and music education. More Able Than Dis is sponsored by the Music Department at Georgia College and State University, Georgia's designated public liberal arts university. Today we'll be talking with our special guest, Dr. Henry McPherson, about improvisation as a strategy for opening access to people with dementia. Dr. Henry McPherson is an interdisciplinary artist, composer, and researcher at the University of Manchester, focusing on ecological improvisation, sonic arts, and community well-being projects, especially related to dementia care, working as a postdoctoral researcher for Creative Manchester platform and exploring music with plants, nonverbal communication, and transmedia performance. How are you?
Hi, Tina. Yeah, I'm really well, thank you. I'm doing okay. Looking forward to the winter time. It feels
Sure,
like a
yeah.
winter
It's
break.
colder here than we're used to.
Yeah,
So in the
it's
30s and 50s, which I guess is 0 to 25 Celsius?
yes, I think my mother still uses Fahrenheit. Her generation in the UK use Fahrenheit for measurements. So I think that's about right. Yeah, it's pretty cold. It's been freezing here. So
Yeah, we're not nearly as cold as you are, but in Georgia, where I am, we tend to be characterized by 100-degree heat. And
okay, yeah,
so 50 is very cold to us.
right. Yeah, here it's been we haven't had snow here, but it's been icy. Icy.
Sure. So, all right. So you are finishing or have just finished your fellowship on improvisation with, you said, people with Alzheimer's?
Yeah, so I have been between jobs. I've just actually started a new fellowship, which is looking at improvisation and well-being in a very general sense. And that's a research fellowship at the University of Manchester in the UK. And I was previously working on a postdoctoral project where I was working with people living with dementia on an improvised music making program. So yeah, that was my first job after my PhD, was that
Right.
project.
And so why did you land on improvisation as your focus?
So to give you a little bit of background, I'm an improviser. I am a musician, composer, performer, and I really started to focus on improvisation at the end of my master's study as a practitioner, and my PhD was in improvised music and also in improvised dance. So improvisation is kind of my specialism if I have one, which sounds like a funny thing to say because it's so much emergent and to do with being in the moment. But with this postdoctoral project, I saw the title improvisation in a job description for the first time in my life, which I thought was amazing, and hence why I applied for the job and luckily got it in the end.
That's for me, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's unusual. It's not I would say it's quite a small field, improvisation study. Although I should say that there is a center in Canada, the International Institute for Critical Improvisation Study out of the University of Guelph, I think is housed,
Hmm.
is a big kind of center for critical improvisation studies. So there is a field,
Sure.
and they've done a huge amount of work there. But yeah, so I came to improvisation really through practice, first of all, is what I would say.
The Center for Music Education at Georgia College is excited to offer a classroom instrument repair workshop in conjunction with the Band Instrument Repair Academy in June 2026 at the historic Georgia College and State University campus in Milledgeville, Georgia. Contact tina.holmes-davis@gcsu.edu for the registration link. Space is limited, so register today. All right, and what did you find generally with your people with dementia in terms of the way that improvisation worked for them in various ways?
Hmm. So the program I was looking at was a music making program run by an orchestra called Manchester Camerata, based in the UK in Manchester. and they run sessions for groups of adults living with dementia and their family carers, and paid carers to come together. And the idea of these sessions is that they're hour-long sessions led by the people living with dementia, where there's group improvisation altogether. And this exists in community in Manchester. So there's a big former monastery in Gorton, which is a region of Manchester, where these sessions take place, which is the orchestra's home. But they've also developed a model which exists in care homes. So as part of our project, we were looking at how this was working in the care home context. And actually, we were really focused on how the staff in the care homes could be trained in how to facilitate these sessions. Just to give a bit of background.
Sure.
I think from my perspective, improvisation with people with dementia is kind of a wonderful thing to experience, particularly for people who are later on in the dementia journey, post-diagnosis, who maybe don't have the same faculties of communication that they used to have. Improvisation can be a wonderful way of meeting people in the moment, and co-creating together, even when there are difficulties in verbal communication. In our study, I witnessed groups of people coming together, professional musicians, people living with dementia, carers, other people who'd come in for the session, co-creating in what felt like a very democratic space. So when a group improvisation is taking place and everyone is contributing in their different ways, and everyone is listening with a really kind of open ethos, and an ethic of inclusivity, if I can call it that, that allows for people of lots of different experiences, of different capacities, to come in and be part of the same shared musical event. So that's kind of the main thing that I witnessed with working with people with dementia in that sense. Yeah.
Were your improvisers primarily improvising musically, and if so, were they singing or playing, or were they primarily dance?
So the improvisers in this context, the sessions are led by professional musicians from the orchestra, from Manchester Camerata, who have been trained in working with people with dementia. Some of them are orchestral musicians and music therapists at the same time. Some of them are just orchestral musicians. And so they kind of, they're the main facilitators of the sessions. The people living dementia taking part in the sessions would be playing percussion instruments. Sometimes they would also use their voices. Sometimes there would be dancing, and that emerges quite naturally, I think, out of music making. Sometimes we like to think it doesn't, but it really does. So a combination, but those sessions were largely driven by percussion, kind of shared percussion instruments in the center that everyone could use, and there were orchestral instruments there as well, played by the orchestral musicians.
The Belle McCroy Music Collective empowers music educators and student leaders through purposeful teaching, artistic excellence, and transformative leadership. Grounded in fundamentals, driven by equity, and inspired by community, we cultivate musical independence and champion the responsible stewardship of each individual's musical gifts. Through coaching, consulting, and collaboration, we help music programs thrive, one note, one leader, one classroom at a time. For more information, visit bellemcroymusiccollective.com. That's Belle McCroy Music Collective, all one word, .com. Yeah, I love that many African languages don't have a separate word for dance and for music. They have one word that encompasses all. And so, because that shows us that in their brains, dance and music are the same thing.
I think I come from a background in classical music, Western classical music.
Sure.
A lot of my colleagues do, and music for us can sometimes feel quite an atomized thing that's separated from the other art forms. But during my PhD, I trained in contact improvisation, a dance improvisation form, and I spent a lot of time working with dancers and understanding that as musicians, our bodies are very much, physical entities, and that we have this realm of kinetic expression that's open to us, and that the two are really not separate.
No, and you see that in children, small children, they sing and they dance together. and they learn movements as they learn to sing. And I
Yeah.
noticed that when I used to work, I would visit during high school on the special education hall, specifically into what we would call a severe profound class.
Hmm.
And there was one particular young man with autism, and he was
Hmm.
nonverbal, but he would
Mm.
sing and he would dance. And
Mm.
yeah, his singing was basically just oohing, but he would
Hmm.
dance as he sang, and he always
Mm.
put his hand up to his ear, which I thought was adorable.
That's very Mariah Carey like. Very good.
Yes.
With
Well, it would have been the right time for Mariah Carey back. Yeah,
yeah,
one,
I
yeah,
I think with especially with the voice, because it's something that comes out of the body, you can't detach it from the body. There's such a natural linkage there. And but with percussion as well, especially with things that are really tactile that involve us, kind of engaging lots of different muscle groups, I think it can brings us into this mixed space.
yes, and it allows, I was a band director for years, and the thing that all of my orchestral and vocal people struggle with band instruments is the spit. And so
Mm,
percussion allows you to share instruments without spit.
yes, although I will say, having worked with children with percussion instruments, sometimes they do
Sometimes
go in
there's
the
spit,
mouth as
yes.
well. Yeah.
So yeah, so did you find that your people with dementia were I know music therapists find, that we can access things maybe that are lost or hidden
Mm,
through music and things like that. Did you find that there were things that they not necessarily remembered, but
mm.
I don't really understand I think I know what I'm asking. I don't know the
Yeah.
words.
So I would say a lot of what I've heard from music therapists or musicians working with people with dementia is that there's a sense that it can open connections, or it gives us a sense that there's connection which maybe has been lost.
Mm,
Whether or not that's the real internal experience of the person living with dementia, I don't want to speak for that. I can't. But there are definitely modes of contact and connection and communication which feel like they open up a little more through music in general and through improvised music making than they would through, let's say, verbal communication. Even down to kind of resonance and feelings of resonance through instrument, or even physical contact with instrumental
sure.
playing. I witnessed once a person living with dementia in a care home context, who had quite limited mobility, especially in the upper body. And one of the music facilitators of that session was really gently guiding this person's hand over a set of wind chimes, I suppose, or yeah, kind of wind chimes. Like a one of those ones with many, many metal chimes
Yes,
hanging down, rather than like a ones you'd put outside, maybe.
sure.
Um, and what was really interesting to me was that this person then started to explore the wind chimes in a very tactile way, in a very physical way, even with limited upper body mobility. And that was a point of physical connection. It was a way for this person to contribute musically to what was happening, because sound was happening and people were listening as well to what was going on. And also it was a moment of being with this
Sure.
person too, from the facilitator. So yeah, it can be a very powerful thing, I think, for people.
All right. And your more open research that you're currently doing, are
Hmm.
you at a point to have any kind of experiences so far? Or are you still in planning stages or?
Still in the planning stage. I started this new project, really kicked off about 8 weeks ago. I came into
Oh
this new job,
goodness.
so I'm very much still, I'm going through ethical approval. I'm
Yes.
organizing planning my field work, that kind of thing. So no, I'm not there yet. Um, but I've hopped through a couple of different projects over the last 2 years, and one of them has been, in the last year or so, has been speaking with different improvisers about how they use improvisation in different kind of health and well-being contexts. And so I'm just at a point where I'm starting to draw together findings from that little body of
Sure.
work, which is quite nice.
Do you have any suggestions or ideas that you think might be useful for teachers to draw from your work on, specifically when
Mm.
working with students with disability?
Mm. I think, yeah, wow, that's a really important and also quite big question. Because I think improvisation as a whole is something which isn't always well, is and isn't valued in music education, right? So we understand that improvisation is really important for young children as a kind of modality of play, as a way of exploring and learning about the body and music and sound and all these things. And as we move through, especially in formal music education,
Mhm.
improvisation tends to be backgrounded in favor of getting things right all the time and being perfect and playing your scales as they should be played and things like that. Um, so when we're thinking about disabled students and trying to open space for many different ways of being within music education, I think improvisation probably has quite a lot to teach us. Um, if we even just take the idea of inclusive listening, so being in a group of people making sounds all at the same time in an unplanned or unprepared way, how can we open our ears to allow for lots of different expressions to be in the space at the same time? How can we then attune to people's own musical languages, even if, like the example I gave with the person living with dementia, even if they're really, really quiet and
Mhm.
very subtle, how can we open space for people to direct their attention towards that? Um, so for teachers, I think the idea of setting up like group improvisation exercises which teach us how to listen better to each other and how to listen to a spectrum of different kinds of creativity, um, where everyone's not going to be doing the same thing and they're not going to be doing it in the same way because they're coming from very different spaces and they've got different bodies, and different ways of being in the world. I think that could be very useful for us. Um, and in practical terms, I do think that that means more improvisation in the classroom in
Sure.
general. We have to create an improvisation pedagogy so that we can understand it in this way, I think.
So yeah, what I'm hearing, I think, might be, I remember I was in the jazz band in high school, and my jazz band teacher would have us play in unison the like a minor blues scale up and down, 3 times, and each at the end of each one person improvised, and then we did the minor blues scale, and then
Hmm.
and that was his way of helping us to practice our improvisation in whatever
Mm.
keys we were playing in. And so
Hmm.
I'm thinking, even if you were in that ensemble heavy room, to even have a rondo type or
Hmm.
something where each person got to play. Or, I actually have a lot of students who they teach ensemble classes, but then they might have a, sorry, words. They might have a special class maybe at various
Mm.
points during the day or during the week that's in the special education hall with just the students with disabilities, and
Mm.
bringing in something that allows them, like you say, percussion, or something, and
Hmm.
allowing them to work. I have a student who is working with boom whackers. Do y'all have boom
Yeah.
whackers?
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
boomworkers. They're great.
So she's got a class who are of students. She said some have autism, some have Down syndrome, whatever, a couple of orthopedic impairments. And they're actually working on some Christmas arrangements with the boomwhackers to be able to perform with the rest of the band and the choir at Christmas. And
Mm. That's great.
so just, even if you have to go into those kind of isolated, contained things to work with those students,
Hmm.
or, like you said, with our normal quote unquote students, we could actually include improvisation as part of what we do in the traditional
Mm. Hmm. I gave a lecture recently at work around jazz and disability. I'm not a jazz scholar per se, but improvisation, jazz, they overlap. And
they do.
I was speaking with my students about Django Reinhardt, this amazing guitarist from the 30s and 40s who really only had the use of 2 fingers on his left hand, and he could
Mhm.
use the fourth and fifth fingers on his hand a little bit, I think, for bar chords and things like that. But we were talking about how, Django is a really good example of a disabled musician whose sound emerged from an experience of disability. So, the way that he played, his technique was reinvented because of how his hand was and how he used
Mhm.
it. But then how that has been taken up by many, many guitarists and other artists since then, non-disabled artists as well, who are like emulating his sound. So,
That sound, yeah.
yeah, so I think that's a really good example as well of how we can rethink technique in terms of disability, and just think, well, this is an affordance. It's something which, opens the body and the instrument in a different way.
Yeah, I always
Yeah.
think, I think it was attributed to Thomas Jefferson or something, don't give me 300 ways it'll fail. Give me one way that we can succeed,
Hmm.
And I think, yeah, Tony Iommi from the band Black Sabbath credits Django for
Yeah.
his inspiration to continue playing after his fingers were cut off.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
So,
So I think he's a really fantastic example. And yeah, so there's sound which emerges from experience, and I think I'm a big advocate for rethinking instrumental technique in as many different ways as we can. Having trained
mm,
in classical piano, which kind of, no matter which school you're training in, you're taught that there's one way to play,
one,
and this is how
yes,
you do your technique, and that you sit like this, and your hands do this, and that and the other. But even for people who are not disabled, there are idiosyncrasies. We all have different bodies. We all have different ways of approaching things. So we have to learn what it is actually to have diverse human bodies, and
sure,
how our instrumental technique needs to be diverse as well, I think.
sure, yeah. And I'm a one-handed clarinet player, so I'm going to get behind that. So, yeah. A special thanks to Zildjian Cymbals for their support of the Center for Music Education at Georgia College and State University. The Zildjian Company has been synonymous with setting the standard for the development and manufacture of high-performance musical instruments since 1623. As the world's leading maker of cymbals, drumsticks, and percussion mallets, Zildjian products are sold across the globe under the Zildjian, Vic Firth, and Balter brands, and are the standard to which all cymbals, drumsticks, and mallets are measured. Can you give us examples of, or it'd be varying finger strength, varying finger length? What would be a diversity in your body that
Mm.
would contribute to varying technique on the piano?
Yeah, for the piano, I suppose, yeah, strength and power, and kind of muscle degree of muscle degradation, for example. Speaking personally for a second, my mother has multiple sclerosis, and
Mm-hmm.
she is a musician. Got her diagnosis when I was probably 4 or 5 years old, I think. So for most of my life, I've known that she had that her hands, for example, there's been muscle degradation in her hands over that time. So the way that she plays the piano now is different to the way that she used to play the piano. So yeah, the degree of muscles that you have in the hands, also in the arms, I suppose, finger strength and finger span. So
Sure.
the
Does your
ability
mom
to,
have a lighter touch now than she used to have?
I would say so, yeah. And I think, I don't want to speak for her, but I know she's told me in the past that, of course, she gets, it's frustrating that she can't
Mm.
reach things in the same way as she
Mhm.
used to be able to. Um, but by, when the piano tuner comes to the house or something, and she sits down to play or something, people are still like, oh my goodness, like here, you can see technique there.
Yes.
But it's a question of adapting, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, so those are just a couple of examples for pianists anyway. Yeah.
I had a student on last season, last year, who has a, a degenerative connective tissue disorder.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
she is a pianist, but she actually had to drop her music major and change
Mm.
majors because she can't play 7 days a week
Yeah.
because her tissues just won't do it.
Yeah. And reminds me of something else I was reading around Django Reinhardt, actually. I forget which scholar said it, but they were saying, Django wouldn't necessarily have been able to play like your classical guitar repertoire, because
Mm-mm.
that repertoire itself excludes on the basis of technique. And so it's interesting as well to think about how, even just the idea of playing for 7 days on the trot, if that's what you have to do to practice to reach a certain kind of virtuosity, according to someone, that mean, maybe there's a way of rethinking that.
Mhm.
And there can be many different types of virtuosity. And it's not all about being able to play as fast and as loud and as impressively as you can, I think.
Yeah, I always go back to Thomas Kwastoff, who, has upper and lower limb disorders.
Hmm.
And he was denied a conservatory education because he couldn't pass piano proficiency.
Yeah.
And I mean, I look now at Thomas Kwastoff and I go, who said no? And how would you like to live the rest of your life knowing that you said no to Thomas Kwastoff?
Yeah. Well, someone's living with that,
Yeah,
someone
one
living
of the
with that.
greatest baritones of yes, the modern yes.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just, yeah, for me, it raises the question of like how we construct what we think our canons of music making to be, how we decide what is and what isn't most valued within the work that we're doing. And we all know that this is a conversation that we need to blow apart in so many different ways in terms of who's involved in our music making, who gets to decide what about it. And this is one area that I think we really need to develop, is reassessing what we consider amazing virtuosic playing to be, in as many different forms as we can.
Sure. Season 2 of More Able Than This is sponsored by the music department at Georgia College and State University. In addition to bachelor's degrees in music and music therapy, including a BA plus MAT path to initial teacher certification, GCNSU offers an online master's degree in music education for certified teachers seeking to expand or improve their knowledge and skills, as well as a hybrid Master of Arts in Teaching degree for those seeking initial music teacher certification in Georgia. We accept certified and licensed teachers from across the U.S., and Georgia certification is reciprocal with most other states, so don't let state boundaries deter you from applying. Apply now to start in summer or fall 2026. Contact tina.holmes-davis@gcsu.edu for more information about the graduate music education degrees at Georgia College and State University. I think that when I teach a class called Music for the Exceptional Child, a course which is required for music teacher certification.
Mm.
And, we talk a lot about the mean and how everything is geared toward the mean body, the most common
Yep.
body. And we have bodies this way and bodies that way that don't fit that. And, like you said, the literature itself will prohibit certain bodies from being able to do.
It's very interesting. I discovered, and this is not a disability per se, but I discovered as an adult that I have a linkage between two fingers on my hand, which is, not supposed to be there. So when I hold my finger like this, I can't bend my thumb, and I can do it that way around, but I can't do it that way around.
Huh.
And this has bearing on when I was a teenager learning to play the violin.
Sure.
I really struggled, as it turns out, because I clamp and I grip, and because these two things move in synchrony, it made it incredibly difficult to learn the technique. I've since learned as an adult that actually cello position is much better if I want to play a string instrument and try and explore, because it opens things in a different way.
Sure.
But even in just that music education, it was incredibly frustrating for me at the time, and not really understanding and knowing what that was. And my
Yes.
teacher, with the best intentions, I don't think knew how to address that.
Sure.
So,
And that's the point of my podcast is we have a lot of teachers who would love to teach everybody, but they
mm,
just don't know what to do.
mhm.
And yeah, I remember I was playing on the one-handed clarinet even. I was playing duets with the clarinet professor at my university just a couple years ago. And so, she being the clarinet professor, I deferred to her.
Mm.
And so we would stand there and we'd wait and wait, and I'd go, "What are you waiting for?" She said, "So I was waiting for your hands to get in position." Because,
Ah,
it's just so ingrained in her
yeah,
that, the right hand's on top, or, the left hand's on top and the right hand's on
yeah.
bottom, that she
At the
couldn't get past the fact that I wasn't set up that way.
And at the same time, it's just come to my mind that, there's a famous pianist like Horowitz, used to play in what we would consider a really poor playing position,
Sure.
and I don't know how much of that came from his physicality and his body, but he used to sit with his hat. He was almost kind of like underneath the keys like this, and still this is astonishing sound coming out. So, in some ways, if someone is like a superstar, then we
They can,
accept it. That
yes.
we say, yeah, that's fine. But in general, we struggle
We
with that
don't,
idea.
yeah.
Yeah.
We wouldn't let that person become. So let's loop it back around to
Yeah, sorry.
improvisation. So we have these students that maybe have physical differences that we need to figure out how to incorporate, and we have this literature that is by nature exclusatory.
Yeah.
How could we use improvisation to either do something other than this literature or use the improvisation to bring them to a place where they might be able to reach the literature?
Mm. Well, I think that on the one hand, if you're learning how to play an instrument with your body in your way, then that is a form of improvisation in itself. So
Sure.
developing your technique, you're saying as a one-handed clarinetist, you know, you're improvising your way now with the clarinet to make your one-handed clarinet playing. So I think allowing students however we can, giving students a sense of the freedom to explore in that way, to find out what works for them, is an improvisation in a kind of pedagogical sense. I think as well that giving time for exploration of lots of different types of sound and how these different sounds come out of the instrument can be really good in making students feel that the instrument is theirs, you know, that it's not such a scary thing, you know?
Sorry, I'm just picturing, I was a middle school band director,
Yeah.
and I'm just picturing, 35 to 60, depending on which year it was, 12-year-olds with instruments all trying to figure out what sounds they can make.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've done that in kids education. I've worked
Hmm.
for a company here in the UK where we ran Saturday morning classes for music students from the ages of, I think, probably about 7 to 18.
Hmm.
So across the grades, and some of what I did with them was these more soundscape type improvisations where it was, okay, we're going to be the sounds of the forest now, or okay, we're going to
Okay.
be the sounds of the sea now. What does that sound like on a trombone? What does it sound like here? What does it sound, imagine the the sea on a trombone. Um, and and thinking, I had some students, for example, who had real sound sensitivities or sensory processing issues, specific needs when it came to kind of tactile stuff, and who maybe sometimes wore ear defenders or things
Yes.
like that. And so in that sense, we used improvisation as a way to explore different sound worlds, which were maybe more accommodating for some of these students. And also in a way it revealed what was not so accommodating. So when you have 30 students in front of you who are all trying to play as loud as they can because they're trying to be the crashing waves, that
Yes.
reveals actually that we need to listen more sensitively because not everyone is able to be in that space. So yeah, those are a couple of things. I think composers could also, thinking about the literature, composers could improvise a little more with their conventions of writing. So exploring what it is maybe to workshop and work closely with a performer, with a student, even in the writing of music for that student or for students with similar needs. I think that would be helpful. Quite often the composition process can be quite detached and
Mm.
atomistic, and you're writing
Yes.
for an imaginary person, but no
Yes.
one is actually imaginary. So I think, it's better and I consider that a kind of improvisation too. So it's, exploring new possibility in a way where we don't know what's going to happen and we don't know how it's going to happen. That's what improvisation is at its core, really.
And you just reminded me, and this is something I had not taken from here to here, but apparently the composer Robert Smith's wife is a band director of middle school through high school, and
Mm,
her bands won BOA, which is Bands of America. It's a big marching competition,
right.
but marching this span of ranges. So Robert Smith wrote for her. He wrote these books that had these high school level charts, but then he'd write parts of the same chart for beginning musicians. So when you
Mhm.
play it all together, the more competent musicians have
Yeah.
the harder line, but the parts that the less competent musicians or the beginning foundational level musicians are playing is supportive of that line.
Mm.
And so
Something
I'm wondering if we couldn't write, parts like that for students with disability.
Yeah, and you just reminded me as well of something I was going to say, which was around different types of score and different score techniques. So I've in my work in education and as a performer, I've worked a lot with graphic scores and with text scores and with elements of scoring which are not just using Western traditional
Sure.
notation. And you can still use other elements to create, scale or harmony or whatever happens to be. It doesn't have to be totally atonal, free music, although I love that very much. You can So, graphic score, for example, using shapes, using color, using other modes of presenting information can also open up space for students, especially for those who I think about students I've had with dyslexia or dyscalculia who have issues with reading and struggle with notated music, which is a really complicated. Western notation is super complex
Yes.
to get used to. Um, so we can be more inclusive in that sense too, I think, about how we present the work, and also not always thinking that if it's written in Western classical notation that's the only way or the best way,
Yes.
you know?
Yeah, I worked a couple of years ago with a peer musician who has intellectual developmental disorder,
Hmm.
and she played guitar, but the music therapist would color code the music, the sheet music, and the strings on the guitar.
Mm.
And so she would play according to the color, and then I guess the number in the color would tell her the fret.
Hmm.
I remember big picture, not little picture.
Yeah.
But then she would memorize rhythm, and so there was an element of being off the page that she had to know.
Mm.
But it allowed her to play, whatever music they were playing on the guitar and keep up.
I think there's also an element in if I kind of zoom into big picture improvisation for a second again, where when we improvise, we're being creative, we're kind of exercising our creative agency. And in so many senses, for disabled people, agency can be taken away,
Oh,
or
yes.
not afforded to you if you have a disability by systems, structural barriers, whatever it happens to be. If we think of the social model of disability,
Mm,
especially. So I think improvisation, in a sense, opening space for people to step into an agency of their own can be a way of coming up against that
mm.
in a useful way. So
That's brilliant. Yeah.
in a small way or in a big way, I think, because
Mm.
improvisation involves inherently being creative, making creative decisions, and especially if you're working in a group, negotiating everyone's creativity all at the
Sure.
same time, you know?
And I can say, in my experience after my stroke, I used to make terrible decisions just to be able to make a decision. I didn't
Yeah.
care, but yeah, the first thing that happens is somebody else makes all of your decisions. And
Hmm.
every morning when I woke up, there was always the passing off of the nurses, and that they
Hmm.
went through the whole, female age, whatever. And then it would be, and her decision maker is her husband. And I'd be like,
Ah,
no,
I
my
see.
decision maker is me. But no, my decision maker was my husband. And
Mm.
so he could literally make any decision, and I just had to sit there
Hmm. Yeah, I've
and
I've I've witnessed this myself as well with different situations in my family as well, for disabled people in the family. And there can be an empowering aspect then of any decision made. It feels
yes,
like, so if in and we have responsibility within our creative work to make sure those spaces are there, and
yes.
that people can exercise that power, I think.
That's brilliant. I had not thought about, but now that you say it, it's very clear. Improvisation as agency is
Yeah.
huge.
Hmm. There's a I forget well, I'm not sure how to pronounce the scholar's name actually, but this scholar Arceli Dokumasi, who wrote a book, the subtitle of which is How Disabled People Improvise More Habitable Worlds. Let me find the title actually. This is because I came across this quite recently. Activist Affordances, it's called. And this idea that, because of the barriers faced when you have disability, you find other ways of doing things. And that's
Yes,
improvisation, whether that's finding new ways to put on your socks or to cook or leave the house or get dressed or whatever it happens to be, or play an instrument. So I think that's a really interesting idea that
that
actually
is.
disability is a model for improvisation, because you know
That's
and
brilliant. Yeah, I'm sorry. That's brilliant. I'm processing.
Yeah, of course, and that's not my idea at all. I mean, it
That's
comes
okay.
comes from this person, but I think yeah, there's something in that definitely. So when we're think as music educators, right now I'm teaching undergraduate students, postgraduate students at the university, and I'm trying to think where are the spaces that open up the agency in different ways for people. And if we're in a performance improvisation setting, I think a lot of that, I've said this before, but it comes down to like listening and to learning how to let other people occupy space
Hmm.
while you're also occupying that space, and that they can do that differently to how you're doing it. you know Whether that's making a sound differently, whether it's actually this person needs to play for a little bit longer or wait a little bit longer before they come in. Whatever it happens to be, I think there's got to be some grace given within these environments, and very often in higher education, which is like a pressure cooker for people a lot,
Sure.
that's not available to them.
Yeah, there's so much, and this is one of my pet peeves is the amount of attention we as Western classical musicians give to the written page.
Mm.
So I always go back, is the notation the music or is the music the music?
Yeah, I am totally on the same page. And
So, yeah.
I sorry, go on.
I'm sorry, improvisation I think allows the music to be the music.
I agree. And when I've taught kids piano for a long time, lots of different kids coming through, disabled, non-disabled, many different types of needs. And my first lessons with the children, I would always start with improvisation, with exploring the instrument.
Hmm.
Our parents very often would want me to be pushing into notation quite
Hmm.
quickly. And so I would have a lot of conversations explaining, no, actually, we need to explore, we need to develop a sense of agency, we need to feel empowered to play this instrument. And the piano is huge, especially
Yes.
for a 6-year-old. It's
Yes.
giant and terrifying. And
Hmm.
it shouldn't be. So yeah, finding space to be away from the page is really important, and it does keep it alive.
And I think that you just described why the Suzuki method fails when it fails is
Hmm.
because what Suzuki wants these children to do is be listening and repeating. And what the
Yeah,
parents want the child to do is practice for 30 minutes playing Mozart.
yeah, and perfectly as well.
Yes. Yes.
Um, I think actually that's sorry, I'm jumping quickly
No,
between
that's
things.
okay. We're good. My GA will clean it up.
The It's just reminding me that improvisation, when we improvise, and I this is what I teach, there's no right and there's no wrong ultimately,
Mhm.
because as soon as you start thinking that way, you're taken away from the moment, and you get trapped, you're kind of stuck. What improvisation is really good at doing is helping you be present when things go wrong, and be creative to move quite quickly onto the next thing. And I think that that's important when we're thinking about accessibility, or perhaps a student who on some days has a certain degree of physical dexterity, but another day is not going to have that. There's a training in an improvisational mindset, for want of a better word, which can maybe help with that
Sure.
process. If you have a fluctuating condition, if or yeah, chronic pain, for example, or something
Sure.
which comes and goes, I think there's a degree of finding a way to be present with what's happening and find alternatives and move through it. And we can certainly develop that through
Sure.
the experience of music making.
And I'm thinking of bipolar students who may be
Mhm.
manic one day and just hungry to do everything, and then the next day they can't even get up.
Yeah.
There's a fluidity there too.
Hmm. And it's about being able to I use the word accept a little bit cautiously. It's more like being able to be with whatever is going on at
Yes.
that time, and and move it or move with it into something that's more useful or nourishing or skillful for you at that moment, I think.
I love this idea of, yeah, being in the moment and having agency to control and not being tethered to the page and all of this. I mean, I love it for everyone, but especially for those of us who really struggle with the page.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and it's I mean, it sits at the heart of improvising. It's not for me, for someone who improvisation has become very important to my life, it's not just oh well, anything goes. We just get up on stage and we do whatever we want.
Sure.
It's serious practice. And I really emphasize this idea of learning to be present in your own
Mm-hmm.
body and with whatever is happening and changing around you. And if you can find some stability in that or flexibility in that, then I think that's great. And you can find both actually as well.
Well, thank you so much. I think that's our time. Do you have any last ideas or any advice you'd like to share with teachers who are trying to apply what we're working on?
I would say ask the students, like see what the students think. The students are incredibly innovative, and I'm not saying that teachers aren't doing this. Of course, we all are. We're always asking for feedback all the time. But these creative innovations, these ideas come from the student body. How can I do this instrument differently? How can I make a piece in a totally new way? It's not a one-way street.
Sure.
So yeah, taking all of our training and all this kind of thing and bringing it into dialogue with the wonderful creativity we get from the people we work with, I think is the way.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been lovely. Thanks.
This podcast was created and recorded by Dr. Tina Holmes Davis. It was edited and produced by Landon Frazier. Music composed and performed by Brent MacDonald. More Able Than Dis is an initiative of the Centre for Music Education at Georgia College.